Hello, everybody. Dom Nicastro here, CMSWire.com managing editor. We're here for another LinkedIn Live on CX. This time we're going to be talking about effective CX leadership. And these two gentlemen here know a little bit about that. They've done it, been there, done that. Brian O'Neill, Jeb Dasteel. They also happen to be, I'm going to go on a limb and say these guys are just best friends, right? Is that too much, Brian?
We're very good friends.
Yeah, acquaintances.
Maybe not even acquaintances. If Brian's going to put it that way, then maybe not even acquaintances.
No, we're great friends and colleagues, and we've done a lot of work together and continue to look at the market together. So I would say I look at Jeb as a dear friend, Jeb.
Me too. Me too, Brian.
And they also have another thing in common, too. They're CMSWire contributors. And those are the folks from the trenches of CX telling us what's on their minds, what's the industry pulse. And it's great to have both of you in that and on this LinkedIn Live. So let's just get started. Before we get into our 5 characteristics, we're going to break these down into 5 of effective leadership in CX. Let's go with Brian first. Brian, give the listeners a little lowdown and the viewers where you been, what you up to now.
Yeah, first of all, Dom, thank you and to the team for allowing us to be part of this. It's great to be on the LinkedIn Live today. I spent the last 13 and a half years with FIS. FIS is a global leader in financial technology. The last 6.5 as chief client officer, and the last couple of years really with the international and global sort of oversight. The past few months, I've been having a lot of fun digging into a lot of different companies, been asked to do some consulting engagements, and still active on the board of the North Florida chapter for LLS, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So very much staying busy and get to contribute to CMSWire too. So look for that fall series that you guys have been promoting every Monday. Real thrilled to be writing the path to excellence each week for CMSWire.
Yeah, I love that series. And you can check it, like you said, every Monday on CMSWire.com. And we got a lot left to do with that one. And by the way, Brian is completely showing me up. I mean, I am an actual CMSWire employee. I do not have CMSWire branding behind me. I have a nice plant. But Brian, you're bringing your A game today.
Just demonstrating the marketing skills. It's all part of it.
Amazing.
Absolute fire. And Jeb Dasteel, your presenter today. What's going on in your role lately, Jeb?
Well, let's see where to begin. So I up to a few years ago, I was the chief customer officer at Oracle. That was from 2008 to 2019. Since 2019, I've been running a little consulting firm called, of course, Dasteel Consulting. I also, during this last couple of years, founded a little group of chief customer officers called the Customer Strategy Alliance. It's sort of a think tank opportunity for collaboration, for networking, for trading ideas and so forth, big ideas, big thoughts. So that's what I've been doing. I'm a CMS contributor. I'm very proud of that as well, Dom. And right now doing a bit of research actually on CCO and CX leadership org design. So that's kind of what I'm up to at the moment.
Awesome. Years of CX experience here combined. All right, let's get into it, gentlemen. I'm hoping that there's some massive disagreement in this. It's going to be fun. We got to shake this Thursday afternoon up in November here. I'm hoping for like Hagler Hearns, kind of like that battle. So let's see what we get from these two CX leaders. Here we go. We're going to start with Brian's thoughts first on number 1, driving customer-centered transformation as an agent for change. And that is the number 1 characteristic right now of effective CX leadership. What do you mean here, Brian?
Well, I think the important thing is in all that we do as CX leaders, the word really is about the leadership role that we play, right? So we drive that within our own organization and across the totality of the organization. And just a little foreshadowing, but in the path next week, I'll share with you guys a bit about inspirational leadership. And for me, that's really about authenticity, right? So if we're going to be driving transformational change and being that agent for change as a leader, you've got to be very authentic in what you're doing. And by that, I mean, we avoid things like this is the year of the client. Like, come on, like that's not going to get people motivated to do things. But I think as you look across the organization and you work within your peer group and your colleagues, I think what's also equally important is that there's a sense of accountability and responsibility among your peers relative to the domino effect, right? So if we think about what the client experience ultimately is, while we may be reporting on it or handling it or dealing with some of the fires that arise during the day, the other areas also have to be aware of that domino effect. If we release poor code, if we've got a system outage, those sorts of things. So I think it comes from the authenticity among the organization and then the communication among the group so that everybody's really bought into what you're trying to accomplish to drive that really transformational change and be that change agent.
I'm going to radically disagree. No, I'm probably not going to disagree so much with
hoping
Brian on this
for it.
one, but there will be disagreements this morning. I promise you that. Now let me just sort of follow up. I think on the authenticity aspect of what Brian said, which I really do like very much. I think oftentimes people think about CX and their role as a CX leader as kind of an evangelist, maybe an evangelist first before all else. And I think that's fine to a degree, but I think taken to the extreme, there could be a real challenge with that, because to me, evangelizing can sometimes forsake what's really happening on the ground, what's really going on in the organization, and specifically how to really how to link what your CX objectives are to the rest of what the firm is trying to get done. And if you can't make that connection, if you can't be authentic, be authentic about where the firm is in terms of maturity across all different kinds of characteristics like these, or other CX related characteristics. And if you can't very directly and in a very authentic way relate what you're trying to get done, what you want to evangelize about, in fact, to what the company's mission really is and what the challenges are, both near and far, you're just not going to get there. So I really do think that's one of the most crucial aspects.
One of the things that we worked on together was the idea of like a top 10 approach, right? In terms of making sure that you've got really clean mile markers and things that you're calling out. So I think that plays to it. To your point about, it's one thing to evangelize, but you've also got to point to those mile markers along the way, right?
Yep, absolutely. I think another interesting and important aspect of this business about being an agent for change is how you exercise authority, or how you lead. And I think we've probably all seen different versions of a model that talks about, do you lead by organizational authority, or do you lead by influence, or all kinds of stripes in between. To me, CX leadership is necessarily very much about leading by influence and your personal ability to bring others along with you. And the only way you can really effectively do that, I believe, consistently across any organization, any industry, is being able to lead by influence. I think that's a crucial component to this.
Yeah. Before we get to number 2, I want to ask each of you about this too, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we're in a terrible time economy-wise, right? The layoffs are increasing, and how do you remember challenging times when you were CX leaders in your organization, FIS, Oracle? Brian, was there a challenging time when you were there with economic times, and how did CX sort of change in those times? And what do you suggest now, November 2022, with it's a lot of doom and gloom out there?
Yeah, I love the question. And I'm going to foreshadow a little bit. When we get to the 8th edition, I do talk a lot about in the path to excellence on the change topic. Unfortunately, what you're describing, when you're in a larger organization like an FIS or an Oracle, there's always pressure from a cost containment perspective, from an efficiency perspective. So there's a lot of that's happening each and every day, regardless of the macroeconomic headwinds. Obviously, they're exacerbated today in light of what we see in the market. The thing that I think is critically important, Dom, to your question is, it's about being as transparent and as inclusive in what those challenges are with your team. So not only your leadership team, but those that are down. I had an opportunity at one point in my career, I led sort of a merger transition team, and it was going to have a huge impact on the company that was being acquired, which was the company I was in. And what I found was the more honest, the more open, the more direct we were with the team, the better the input, the better the output, and the longer they were connected to what it was that we were doing. One of the themes that I share a lot in my writing is, I think if we treat our teams like adults, you'll be amazed by what they will accomplish. And I just think it's critical that we share with them what we're up against.
I couldn't agree more. I think the whole point to me of being, or a big part of being authentic, is reflecting what's actually going on and what the constraints are. I mean, it's great. Back to my earlier point about being an evangelist, it's great to be able to talk about, kind of, this is what the gold standard is, but are you ever really able to achieve the gold standard, especially when times are financially challenging or ambiguous? No, the answer is absolutely not. But if you have the right sort of framework and the right ability to draw on relationships with the rest of the executive team, you can make some hard decisions, but make some hard decisions that take you in an effective direction where you can, with, say, the limited ability to invest. And there's always going to be a limited ability to invest. You can invest in the exact right things, or at least have a high degree of likelihood that you will have invested in the exact right things that will produce the right return on that investment.
All right, let's get into number two. Number two out of the 5 characteristics of effective CX leadership, and that is developing effective partnerships and engagement with other leaders. Definitely can relate to this one. How you interact, the partnerships you establish inside the organization are so crucial. Let's start with Jeb. Let's keep it going with Jeb on this one. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd look back at my experience at Oracle, and I think it's a good example where one of the things we did really effectively, we certainly didn't do everything perfectly, but one of the things that was really effective was building relationships, in fact, with the rest of the executive team, and really insisting that every member of that senior leadership team be very actively engaged with customers individually, and own relationships with customers through, say, executive sponsorship kinds of programs, but also take some responsibility, take a significant amount of responsibility for different aspects of that customer-centered transformation, or put it even in somewhat smaller terms, that customer-centered, kind of ongoing shift that we were trying to affect across the business. And part of that is aligning goals and measures as well. And it kind of goes back, in fact, to authenticity. Part of being authentic too, as I kind of said before, is being able to relate what you're doing and what your objectives are to where the business is. And really, to this point specifically that we're addressing now, to every aspect of how the organization is working on today's business challenges, and being able to relate very specifically what the plan for CX is, and what measures of success for CX are, with what the head of sales needs to get done, with what the head of marketing needs to get done, with the head of engineering, and so forth.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about what you said there is that each of those constituencies are your client as well. And so for us, we've kind of lived by the idea of, before you could market externally, you have to effectively market internally. People have to be bought into what you're doing. So I think that captures that community spirit that you're getting at, Jeb, in terms of, do they understand what you're there to accomplish? I worked with a gentleman for a number of years, and he's a great friend and a great leader. And he kind of would say to me all the time, in the absence of a metric, you're merely sharing your opinion. So I do think that you have to bring forward tangibles, right? You've got to bring something that really demonstrates the impact that you're going to have or will happen if there isn't that level of engagement. So I just will tell you, in the first sentence, or the first topic as well, Jeb, you touched on the importance of influence. When I moved to Jacksonville 4.5 years ago, and I was in the corporate headquarters at FIS, it was just really apparent to me, being on site was so critical because of that need for influence among others within, my peer group, right? So that's the most critical thing as a leader within these organizations. In that chair that you occupy, you've got to be front and center. You've got to be sharing your vision, and you've got to be demonstrating accountability to the others that you're providing the service for. So I think it's a great point that you shared in the beginning, and it ties in here as well.
Yeah, the other thing that I think about, and I've said this, I can't even tell you how many times to new chief customer officers or even younger people kind of developing capabilities and going into leadership roles. The last thing that you want to do as a CX leader, wherever that is in the organization, is put yourself in a position where you're competing with your peers for resources and for attention. I mean, that's just so many people, and I get why it happens, but so many people kind of get trapped in that situation where they need headcount, they need dollars for investment, and they end up in these wrestling matches with the very people that they need to befriend, like sales, like marketing, like HR, even like development or engineering. It's just, if you can't get yourself out of that trap, that really is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. There is someone watching right now, maybe, that in
I
general,
hope.
I hope there's someone watching. There's someone watching this in post, right? Or even not watching this, but having this problem. Okay, here we go. There's a CX leader who's having a real hard time with another leader in the organization. It's happening. We know it's happening. They just can't, work well together. I'm going to ask each of you, is there an example of that in the past with you? How did you overcome it? What's your advice to someone who's going through that right now? Brian, we'll start with you.
Well, I would tell you, if that hasn't happened, you're probably not pushing hard enough.
Yeah.
Is the reality. It happens all the time, but I do think with the idea of being an effective leader and leading with influence, what that does is it helps you find common ground, right? So I think to Jeb's point, it becomes less about a competition and more about the end goal for the collective. So where I've had challenges and disputes, and I don't want to name names, development, because that would be rude. The thing that we have to be fundamentally focused on is, what is the impact that we're having? Why is it draining our resources? And why do I have to keep coming back to you asking for help? If we get it right on a release the first time, the call volume drops, the experience level improves, all those sorts of things. So I think it ties back to the whole thematic through this discussion, which is, we haven't said the word, but it's really ownership, right? I think if you share everybody's role in this process and the ownership towards that CX experience, they can be upset with you, but ultimately, if they're focused on the outcome, I think it diminishes the conflict.
I think another way to think about it, maybe, Dom, too, is that I think you kind of need to, in a way, feel like you have to earn the right to, in a conflict, take a stand, And to me, the only way to do that, and I think of so many examples with sales, with engineering, principally, probably more than anywhere else with sales and engineering, say, or sales and development. I'm thinking of the Oracle context, is you've got the way to earn the right to do that, to take a stand and really drive your position into the ground, is to do good for those other leaders, to help sales sell, to help engineering engineer the best products in the world. And you've got, as a CX leader, fundamentally the power to do that, because you've got access to the most precious resource the company has, and that's customers. If you don't have access to customers and you're a chief customer officer or a CX leader, there's a whole different problem. That's a whole different dilemma that you've got to wrestle with. But that's the thing. That's your ace in the hole. That's kind of the superpower that you have. And I say, coming into a relatively new relationship, say with the sales executive, become their best friend. I mean, you really need to become their best friend. You need to wield that superpower of access to customers in a way that maybe sales, at least even for specific customers or maybe market segments, can't do on their own. And once you've done that and demonstrated that you can find a way, beyond, say, conflict and a way toward more alignment, then you've got a level of credibility, street cred, that you didn't have before, and that gives you even more power to get things done.
All right, let's go to number 3. We got 10 minutes to go, so if we go a smidge over, no one's going to be crazily upset there, so we're good. All right, number 3, managing customer relationships as a trusted advisor and creator of value. That sounds so cool, Brian. Elaborate.
It's the thing that I love about this particular idea and the concept of it is when we look at who are the folks that make up the CCO chair, and you start looking at their backgrounds, it's pretty interesting as a tell, right? You've got, and even where the CCO organization lives sometimes, if it's not independent, you see it living in sales or you see it living in marketing. What I would tell you is, when you're the chief client officer, you are the face of the place, right? You are the one that should be standing up, standing in front of, and representing the good and the bad relative to what potentially could be happening. So I think when you think about that, and Jeb, you just nailed it, you've got to be wearing a bit of a sales hat. So if you think about a relationship hierarchy, typically you start as a vendor supplier, and ultimately your goal is to move up that chain, right? To become ultimately, a trusted advisor, right? So in that trusted advisor status, the way I would always look at it is if they asked us to help them write an RFP, you've achieved the trusted advisor sort of framework.
I agree.
But to get there, it takes time. But I would tell you, just as an asterisk, it's equally important to know where your client wants to be with you. How do they want to relate with you in that journey on the relationship hierarchy? If someone doesn't want you to be their trusted advisor and you keep pressing that, that's a lot of wasted effort, a lot of wasted energy, and not a great use of time. I would just tell you here, particularly on this one, the way that you really create and you drive value is by understanding where your clients are, one, and then two, how impactful are they to the results that you're seeing within your company? And for us, three was you got to build out a key accounts team, right? You've got to have a team that's aligned with those high flyers that really do want to be a trusted advisor, those that tend to drive the most amount of revenue, probably the most profit in the contribution margin. So that was just something that we learned very early on in the process in my journey, that the better that we aligned with those key accounts, you could then, exactly to Jeb's point, we could point to opportunities for sales that we were unlocking that sales wasn't seeing because they hadn't just returned and up with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you know what? I so badly want to disagree with Brian, as you encouraged us to do, Dom. But he just seems so right today. He's on the ball.
Well,
I don't know what to tell you. No,
the stars are lining up.
You have that recording forever.
Yeah,
so right.
Yeah, and I already regret saying that. So yeah, I couldn't agree more on the key accounts program aspect. The other thing that I would mention too is that I look back, and I think one of the great lessons I learned, having been a chief customer officer for a long, long time, is that you got to think hard about the time that what you personally spend time on as a CX leader. And what I learned over time, some might argue it took me way too long, but what I figured out eventually was that, I should probably be spending 80+% of my time meeting with customers, either helping sales drive deals, back to the earlier point, or solving thorny problems that maybe others can't solve and need a little more horsepower to do so. But to me, the magic really came, and the realization of this was a little bit mind-blowing for me, was that if I spend that much time with customers, that's great for the company, great for me personally, because I love doing that. If you don't love doing that and you're in this role again, I would say you got a different problem. But it also kind of reinforces the right behaviors in terms of being able to model behaviors around partnership with customers, being able to model the right behaviors around what it means to be a creator or co-creator of value with your customers as well, and ultimately be, as Brian said, I think very well, a trusted advisor.
All right. Number 4, we got 2 left to go. This is a big topic for us. Leveraging effective employee experiences for a superior customer experience. And Brian, tell me something other than happy employees means happy customers.
Oh, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, listen, this really, you're hitting me right in the heart of what drove me and my leadership style was. So when we talk about being an authentic leader, we then have to think about having an authentic organization. So you can't do that without a culture that supports it. And it does have to begin with the EX piece of it. So Dom, as you know, and we talked a little bit about it, but for everybody watching, in 2017, I had sent out a note to my organization and said, EX plus CX equals RX. And it's not a mind-boggling idea, right? But that employee engagement, that employee experience, plus the client experience is going to result in the RX, which is revenue expansion and retention. But it's the culture that drives that, right? To your point, Dom, oh, take care of the client, take care of your employees, they'll take care of the clients. No, you got to really dig in, right? So we were very disciplined in terms of surveying our employees, understanding what makes them tick, what was making them be excited about what it was. We'd reinforce the why, right? I think we too often forget our purpose. You get into a larger organization, somebody like if anybody digs into FIS and you see the amount of money that's moved, the different relationships that are had, we just think it becomes transactional. You've got to make it relational for your employees. They've got to understand what they're actually doing to create these outcomes for those big clients that we've got. So I do think that there's a lot there with it, much more beyond, it's just, well, we'll make it that way. I will tell you, and you're going to laugh. We talked about it in this week's edition of the fall series, right? It's the path to waterfalls. And I kind of teased out, I wasn't just talking about TLC, the old.
Thanks for putting that in my head all day.
Yeah, I know.
I appreciate that too,
everybody. But I do think it's also a bit of teach, learn, and challenge, right? And you have to do that with your own team, right? So that they're fully engaged and that they bring that service going forward.
I think I've got maybe a couple thoughts on this one, Dom. I know that Brian is especially passionate about this theme. Out of all five of them, might be the thing that's maybe the most impactful in terms of what he was able to get done at FIS. But I also think about, I mean, if your leader is the sales executive, the sales leader, then maybe your second very best friend would be HR, the head of HR, the CHRO. For a couple of reasons. One is, I think we all know, in fact, I hate to say it, but an effective employee experience is going to ultimately lead to an effective customer experience. But there's some very specific things you can focus on where employees are very, very actively engaged in supporting customer related processes like account management, as Brian said, opportunity management more broadly for the rest of those accounts beyond those top accounts, anything that relates to ease of doing business for the customer. In fact, at the end of the day, and I think there's a pretty strong body of research that shows you this, is going to be an improvement to the ease of doing business from an employee standpoint. The other thing I guess I would say too is I think it's healthy to think about employees as a great proxy for customers. The point being that employees have the generally same experience that customers have, and employees know what the sentiment of the customer is. I've seen so many different organizations, especially in the last few years when I've been doing this consulting work, that are kind of scratching their head trying to figure out how best to get their arms around what the employee, what customer perceptions are. You know what? You can almost skip the survey and spend half a day talking to employees, and you will get a quite precise view of what customer sentiment is through what the employee sentiment is.
Yep. Well, and what Jeb said too previously, Dom, I think is important, right? His desire to be in front of the clients. It's the way that I've always defined culture is it's how senior leadership acts when everyone is watching. So when everyone sees that level of engagement and that desire to take the tough phone calls or to get in the room, then there's a willingness by others to say, okay, I get this. And I think it bears repeating. Ease of doing business isn't just for the client. It has to be for your employees as well. Are we building systems that make it easy for them to do what they do to be most effective? That has a big, big impact on their engagement. And I think it gets shuffled in the deck and not at the top where it should be.
Yep. All right. Moderator has done a bad job. We only have a minute or so for the last one.
We can do it.
Number 5. I'll give you guys a minute or so on this. Building a team that inspires everyone. Brian, give us a minute on how you do it.
Well, first of all, I would tell you how you know you've done it, and then I'll tell you how you do it. How you know you've done it is when people in the organization want to be a part of your team, when they're reaching out to you and asking you if you have opportunities. That's how you know you've done it. How do you do it? I do think it's from everything we talked about today. It's the combination of being an authentic leader, being consistent in the way you treat everybody throughout the organization, being effective in your influence across your peer group, and having people buy in for the value and the importance of what it is that you're doing. And dare I say, I know it seems like this will be hard for the audience to believe, but you got to have some fun while you're doing it. You got to demonstrate that passion. And then it takes care of itself. Treat people like adults and watch what they'll do. It'll amaze you.
I think, the only thing I'll add to that, Dom, is I think if you look at it from a culture standpoint, and maybe I think Brian and I are in alignment, but I know I'm not in alignment with a lot of other people on this point. I think sometimes that to be inspirational doesn't mean necessarily to drive change in the culture of the company. In fact, I think there's certainly organizations where the organization can change its culture, and changing that through a more customer-centered view is a wonderful thing. But I think what you have to do is recognize early and then often whether the culture really truly can be changed or not. And if the culture can't change, that doesn't mean you kind of throw in the towel and walk home. I think that means you look hard at what the core of the company's culture is, and figure out how to leverage exactly that. That's the power of the company that you work for. How to leverage that into driving a better strategy around customer experience is entirely possible. But at some point you have to accept, recognize, and really ultimately embrace the fact that you've got some cultural characteristics that maybe you don't love, that maybe aren't perfect, but can be used as a secret weapon for driving customer experience. And it's not hard, but that's why we make the big bucks, I guess.
All right, you heard it here from the trenches. Brian O'Neill, Jeb Dasteel. Now we got a LinkedIn Live done, gentlemen. You guys are on CMSWire.com as contributors, and you even did a podcast with us, CX Decoded, that was out this year. And what's next? What are we going to do? A Mastodon Live or something? Like what's going on?
Got to do something on Mastodon. I agree completely.
Yes.
All right.
Thanks,
Tomorrow.
Dom.
Let's just do it tomorrow.
Thanks, Dom.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Great. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for tuning in. CMSWire.com. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Too.
All righty.